All right, well, welcome everybody to episode number 9 of our Flatten the Curve video blog. I am Daniel Fung from MoveUp's Communications Department, and today it's my pleasure to be joined by Neal Adolph, the Director of Labor Participation for the United Way of the Lower Mainland. Neal, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Daniel. It's really nice to be here.
So, Neal, I first met you back in the fall of 2017. I was just starting out at MoveUp at the time, and you were just starting out as the new Director of Labor Participation at the United Way. So, for people who might not know about the connection between the labor movement and the United Way, can you give us a brief overview of it? And also, what's your role there?
Yeah, I'll be as brief as I possibly can. So basically, the Canadian Labour Congress and the United Way of Canada have a signed partnership agreement where they work together on solving some pretty substantial issues that happen in our community, all within the interest of building up diversity, inclusion, and making sure that there's a lot of really great access to programming that is of a really high quality and accessible for people who live in poverty or in vulnerable situations. So that's part of the work that we do. And as a result of that, United Ways across the province and across Canada have dedicated staff. Most United Ways across the province and across Canada, it depends a lot on size, but dedicated staff that navigate and support relationships with the labor councils, with the Labor Congress, and with their affiliated unions. And so that's my role at the United Way. I basically get to hang out with working people and hang out with unions and build up the relationship so that we can really benefit from the knowledge and experiences that working people bring into community and transfer that knowledge into the work that United Way does in community.
Awesome. Now, I know there's so many things that we could talk about, and it would honestly probably take hours to even scratch the surface on some things. And I know you're probably one of the busiest people on the planet, so I'm going to try and narrow this down. Starting off, obviously, a lot of us right now are starting to get used to life in the COVID era. And I want to ask how that has forced the United Way to change the way that they operate, including some of their campaigns, but also what kind of new innovations and new programs that you've been able to come up with to support people, particularly those people who have been especially hit hard by this crisis.
Yeah, so very quickly, United Way had to be really nimble and navigate to help navigate the way that COVID was affecting our community. So, of course, our office went into physical shutdown, so we weren't able to be in the office. Everyone was working from home, and that put a bit of a new challenge into how our office and culture operates, because we are people that hang out with other people to solve problems, and doing that digitally is very different. But we transitioned very quickly. We transitioned very efficiently. And that was important because community very quickly experienced this crisis and dramatic increase in vulnerability. And they needed organizations like United Way to step in and provide some support. So some of the things that we've done is a lot of our program funding goes towards after-school programs, for example. And we very quickly retailored those after-school programs so that even though school was no longer in session inside the buildings, the schooling itself, the after-school programs themselves could continue to support those young people and those families by doing regular check-ins, by providing some kinds of digital programming that would support the kids in the after-school situations, making sure that everyone was feeling as though they were still part of a community, so giving digital opportunities for people to connect. Which we found out was really important. The response that the students, young people had was, this is how I develop my confidence and develop my sense of self-being in outside of school, but also connected to my school community. And maintaining that through our programming was really important. We created this really innovative approach to our relatively new program called Hi Neighbour, but we transitioned it towards something that was a bit more broad-based, and we hired on about 25 new community builders. So they were part-time, temporary roles. They're still with us at United Way, and they basically go out into defined neighborhoods with really high indexes of vulnerability, and they both go digitally and physically, and they kind of collect information on where vulnerable people are and helping connect those vulnerable people either to neighbors that can offer them some form of mutual aid support, or to community organizations that can offer them some broader support. And that speaks to our Mobilizing Local Love project, where we started really bringing in a lot of people from around the Lower Mainland Fraser Valley region to this digital volunteer mobilization tool, and asking people to to give a little bit of their time, maybe a little bit of their effort to making sure that people within their neighborhoods were feeling connected and supported despite the challenges. So a lot of the challenges, I literally, as you said, we could go about this for hours and hours. A lot of the challenges that were popping up were related to food security and mental health. So how could we, especially for people who are forced to self-isolate because either of traveling challenges or because of immunocompromised situations, or because their doctors were telling them, like, you're above the age of 70, you shouldn't be going out so much, that sort of thing. So how did neighbors support neighbors? We created tools and mechanisms as a result of COVID that made it possible for that to happen. And I would be asked a lot of questions at United Way if I showed this video later on this week and I said nothing about the local love food hubs that we've set up. So one of the things that popped up as a result of food security was some of the larger food banks in our region decided to centralize their distribution. So a lot of their satellite offices were shut down so that they could kind of maintain their own their safety of their workers, but also the safety of all the food transition of food from the food banks to the clients. And so what happened was, as food banks shut down, didn't shut down, they centralized, and then as access to the food banks reduced because transportation became more complicated, we very quickly heard from community partners and people living in community that they didn't have access to food, and that was in their neighborhood, and that was putting a lot of stress on families. So we very quickly started creating, in partnership with a lot of different community organizations, food hubs that were embedded in neighborhoods and supporting existing networks of groups. So great examples would be like food hubs that we set up with school districts that were making sure that young people were continuing to access food that they would otherwise access through the school district. And then expanding that network through just like natural organic growth by identifying additional vulnerable folks, and just growing and growing and growing so that everyone in our community, or more people in our community, had access to more secure food sources. So that was really exciting. To date, we've set up more than 59 of those food hubs from the Squamish region all the way down throughout the Lower Mainland, and then all the way up to Hope Boston Bar. So there's 59 new food hubs that have been set up to make sure that people have access to good, nutritious food, prepared meals, food vouchers, whatever it is that they need to get them through this crisis.
And I think that's one of the greatest things about the United Way too, is that they really, they're responsive, but they're looking at what is going on in the community, and they are very, very quickly able to put together those types of programs to respond to the needs of people, and that's so important. You talked a little bit about mobilizing local love, and I know a lot of people want to get find a way to get involved in helping their communities. Is there a way for people to be involved?
Yeah, totally. If you want to get involved with your community, if you've got a bit of time that you can offer to support your neighbors, if you go to our website, uwlm.ca/mobilizing-local-love, then you can sign up as a volunteer through our online tool system, and then you'll start getting notifications about volunteer opportunities that pop up in your neighborhood. And they could be relatively simple. So it could be a case of, we need drivers to take food from this food hub to this neighbor of yours. Or it could be something a bit more interesting or a bit more intense. Like, we need some support in building a local food library, so that someone can quickly jump in and support in building a new little library, but for food, essentially. We've seen a lot of, like, the Peary Promise campaign that we run for the United Way. We use that tool quite frequently to create our volunteer experiences and then get them out to the public so that they can sign up to take advantage of them. So there's all sorts of things that are popping up on a daily basis, because the other side of that is, through the exact same tool, people who are experiencing very particular needs in their neighborhood related to food security. It could be related to mental health. So they just need someone to check in on them every couple of days with a phone call, that sort of thing. They call us saying that they have this challenge, they have this need. And if it's nothing too critical, we toss them in that opportunity into our volunteer system. So again, even some of your members might themselves or their family members need some additional support right now. They can call us, and we can toss the additional support that they need into our Mobilizing Local Love system, and then a volunteer in their neighborhood might be able to jump in and support them.
Awesome. Now, I know there's a lot of great partnerships that the United Way has, and so I want to get into this a little bit as well. So about a week or so ago, the United Way of the Lower Mainland, they announced their 2019 Spirit Awards. It's something that we look forward to every year because it's recognizing the many different individuals, unions, and employers that come together to fundraise for the United Way. And this year, Move Up was very proud to share the Growth Award with Fortis BC and IBEW Local 213. As well, have one of our members, Harvey Cooner, who works at Road Safety for ICBC, being recognized for his work in the United Way campaign at his workplace. So the work of unions across the Lower Mainland to support the United Way is an integral part to allowing the United Way to have the impact that it does. So right now, I know you talked a lot about the different community partners coming together. Are you in contact with different unions trying to figure out even more innovative ways to continue to be able to support the United Way during this crisis at a time when a lot of fundraising happens when you're at the workplace, but few of us are at our normal workplaces right now?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head on a lot of what my job right now looks like. I'm in regular conversation with unions and the labor councils, Fraser Valley, New West, and Vancouver District, trying to connect with them and get a sense like, okay, what can fundraising look like this year? Usually people experience the United Way. We arrive at the ICBC office or we arrive at the BC Hydro office and we say, would you please give? Please consider making a monthly payroll deduction. And it's usually like there's some fun and games. We hang out, we do some trivia, for example, or we play some games in the lobby, that sort of thing. And everyone enjoys it. And then hopefully they go back to their working space and they fill out the paper form. A lot of what is going to happen this year is because a lot of workers have transitioned to working from home or working primarily digitally. A large portion of our campaigning will be switching to digital instead of paper-based. So you'll see, for example, perhaps through your workplace, some opportunities to give popping up in your email account, for example, whereas previously it was previously it might have been a paper form. And that's mostly to protect everybody, because of course we want to reduce what we can to the risk of transmission by not having paper floating from desk to desk. That's going to help out. And it's gonna make it a bit easier for us at the United Way to navigate on our side the potential hazards, workplace challenges that are going to pop up for our workers. And so it's going to be interesting. It's going to be innovative. We've tested this out a couple of times with a few different work sites, and it seems to work out relatively well. But of course, the work that United Way does in community and supporting so many other organizations, and then also the work that we do ourselves, is only possible because of donors. And so we have to come up with new ways for us to engage with people who have donated to us traditionally, but also some potential new donors by telling the story of what United Way does and really using our partnerships with people like Move Up and IBW Local 213, and of course, some of the employers to really enhance the potential for the work that we do. And I think the partnership is deeper than that. Sorry to talk just about fundraising is really important, of course, because it's the core of the relationship. But like we have, because of the partnership, the relationship that we hold with unions is almost like a counseling and advisory role. So I spend a lot of time with senior labor executive leadership, talking to them about what's happening in their community and hearing from them about their concerns and what they want to see the United Way do. So it's a knowledge exchange. And then something that I'm trying to do and more, both through the labor councils, but also just by hanging out with people right now digitally, but hanging out with working people who are members of unions, is to hear from the rank and file, like what's happening in your neighborhood, what's happening in your community, what would you like to see done about it, and how do you want to get involved? So in addition to just fundraising, there's like a relationship that's more open door, and we want your expertise and knowledge to help inform the work that we're doing.
And I think that partnership has always been very, very apparent. And I know a lot of our members are going to be looking forward to seeing what's coming out this year. I know all of our staff are very much interested to see what's going to come out this year. And so we're really looking forward to that. So switching gears a little bit here. And I want to get into this because a couple of weeks ago, our union held an online webinar on combating racism and discrimination, and a lot of stories were shared about people's personal experiences dealing with it. And I know you were invited as a special guest by our Vice President, Christy Slusarenko, to listen in, and I know that was something that you really want to be a part of. I want to get your thoughts on the importance of hearing these stories and having these conversations, and also as well, what kind of supports are there available at the United Way for people?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're in this moment where we're being reminded that systemic racism has this really ugly presence within our community. And it has this deeply personal but broad impact on people of color and racialized groups. Um, and it's deeply troubling, of course. Speaking as a white person, I have never experienced that kind of cruelty. And so I think what a lot of people of color are asking us to do right now is to listen to their experiences and understand them so that we can become better champions in the fight against racism as a systemic challenge that they experience every single day. And part of that includes lifting up their voices, making sure that we are standing behind them, not in front of them in the struggle against racism. But making sure that we're listening, open ears, open hearts all the time. And what I really enjoyed about that session that Move Up held was that the stories that were shared were so personal, but these were from some people that I knew personally, that if they hadn't been given the opportunity and the safe space to talk about the challenges that they've experienced as racialized people, they would never have done that at a union meeting. And so quite frequently, I think the challenges of equity-seeking groups, but racialized people specifically, often get not necessarily forgotten, but they get less space because they don't fall into, it's felt as though they don't fall into the core responsibilities of the labor movement. And I think we're learning right now that one of the core responsibilities of the labor movement is for us to support all workers all the time. And a large portion of our workers are racialized people, and we need to support them all the time. And that means giving them space and listening to their stories. And I think what I really appreciated, of course, Christy giving me the invitation to attend. The moment she told me it was happening, I was like, I need to be there because I want to see what unions are doing about this. I want to hear what working people are experiencing, because I think that's how we'll find the solutions. And I think that there is a lot of listening happening right now, and a lot of learning and a lot of growing that is gonna set new seeds for anti-racism in the labor movement that we are really gonna benefit from for the next decades. I hope we benefit from it for the next decades. And I'm heartened by the leadership that Move Up to make those spaces for listening, because it's not. Some people would say it's not required of them, so it's a real sign of leadership. Yeah. In terms of the stuff that's available at United Way, so we made a statement at United Way, I think it was last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago now, about systemic racism and the Black Lives Matter movement, basically indicating we're going to do this work of listening right now. We're wanting to hear from people who have a great deal more knowledge and expertise than we do, and that we're kind of not interested in sitting back as a silent partner anymore, but we're going to start showing up a bit more directly. The work that United Way has done for the past 15 years, when I look back in our records, I can only go up until about 15 years ago, but it's always been informed by ideas of equity. So even though we don't shout from the rooftops that we are an equity-focused organization, every single investment we make in community through our granting streams or through the work that we're doing directly is always informed by issues of supporting equity-seeking groups, many times racialized groups, but not exclusively racialized groups. And so a lot of the programs that we support go to supporting communities that experience systemic oppression. The one that I think I'm particularly excited about that we've been involved with for about 15 years now is one. It's called Emoja. It's a group based in Surrey that supports new immigrants from Africa, and they do this really important work of helping parents and young people get a better understanding of what life in Canada can be, and how different that feels culturally from what they experience in certain parts of Africa. So it's a really exciting group because it becomes this cultural space that celebrates Africa and the cultures that exist there, the beautiful people that exist there, the beautiful histories that exist there, but also helps them understand like there are differences here, and we need to learn how to navigate those, unfortunately. We like to say in Canada we are a multicultural nation, and we really struggle with understanding what that is, and as broadly, I think. And I think that our long-term investment in programs like Emoja are indications that we're committed to helping those communities and helping ourselves understand the roles that we can play in building up and fulfilling the true vision of what multiculturalism could be. So yeah, I think we've got a long ways to go at United Way, but we're committed to doing it.
This gives also a good segue for me to talk about the fact that obviously right now we're also in Pride season, and this year is going to look quite a bit different because we know that there's not going to be any big parades or any of the usual displays that we would normally see. And I know that our Human Rights and Multicultural Committee here is putting in plans to do more virtual activities. What are some of the things that you're looking forward to this Pride season, and what can we expect to see from the United Way in their support of the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, so I think this is I'm going to piggyback a bit off of what I've said with Black Lives Matter and the discussion about systemic racism. I think United Way also is learning a lot from that we'll be applying to how we understand our role in supporting queer communities. And I'm a proud queer person. I love what Pride does, and I love the conversations that take place when Pride happens. I'm wearing a Pride shirt right now. Yeah. But I think we still have a lot of growth space. I was really heartened a couple of months ago when we were having a lot of conversations with the organizations that we partner with. And we were trying to identify what are the most common recurring issues right now. And we identified two, one being food security, which I've spoken about quite a bit already, and then the other was youth mental health. But we specifically identified queer youth mental health. And I think when we speak about young queer people, we often forget that queer people grow up in families that aren't necessarily queer. And that's a very particular form of challenge that I would say, I don't know if it's unique to the queer community, but speaking personally, it can be a barrier. And for young queer people, it can be a really substantial challenge because they might not be out, they might not be comfortable with their families, all sorts of things like that. And so we very quickly were mobilizing, okay, how do we support organizations that support young people in their mental health challenges right now, who particularly are queer? And so we've sent out a lot of money to build up programs and support programs that were aiming towards that particular demographic. But we did it quietly. And I think the queer community is going to expect more and different things from United Way in the same way that the Black community is going to expect more and different things from United Way, not because we aren't doing some of that work already. Again, we have a lot to learn, but because we're doing it too quietly. And so you're going to see United Way starting to make statements about like, this is where our values stand, and we're proud of these values, and we support them because they support and are part of our vision about building a diverse, inclusive, healthy community for everybody. So I don't know what you'll see from us in the coming weeks and months as Pride festivals go digital and virtual from one municipality in the Lower Mainland and Fraser Valley to another, because it's, speaking as a queer person, it's like, this is our 3 months long of Christmas. It's kind of amazing. You can go from one city to another and go into a different Pride festival every weekend. I'm not quite sure what United Way is going to do about it, but I'm confident that we're going to come out of the current conversations about Black Lives Matter and be able to apply those learnings to supporting other oppressed groups. And I'm quite excited about the conversations that are happening internally right now.
And I think a lot of people who are listening to this are also they want to know about like all the stuff that is being done. And you're right, like a lot of stuff is being done behind the scenes, and I think this is probably gonna get them excited about like learning about more that the United Way is going to be doing to help support them, and really I think that's just that's fabulous. I can't end a chat with you today without being able to talk about one of the more prominent campaigns that United Way has been running over the past few years. And you touched on this very briefly earlier. It continues to run right now, and that's the Period Promise campaign. And I'm going to let you explain it a little bit more in detail. But for people who aren't aware, the United Way has been instrumental in campaigning to educate people about access to menstrual products, or rather the lack of access to for a lot of people for a variety of reasons, one of them being cost. And it's really through your work that we've been able to see announcements over the last few months about these products now being available in public places free of charge for people who need them, places like schools, for example. Move Up was one of the unions that signed onto this campaign, and in our office, which I'm hoping that we'll be able to get back to pretty soon, we have menstrual supplies available in all of our washrooms, which are gender neutral. And we've also worked to encourage all the employers that we work with to make this a reality in their workplaces. So I want to know how that campaign is continuing now, and what the next steps are going to be, as well as what kind of challenges COVID-19 has meant for that campaign.
Oh my gosh, how much time do you have? This is a topic, but a lot of kudos to a couple incredible leaders in the movement. Suzanne Skidmore, of course, Secretary Treasurer for the BC Federation of Labor. She is one of the co-chairs on this campaign, and she has done a huge amount of work on this. Nikki Hill, who's my predecessor at United Way, phenomenal leader, and brought this movement to the United Way of the Lower Mainland, and really helped build up the potential. So I'm really just kind of following their leadership, and they're doing amazing work. But you're not wrong. United Way has been one of the leading organizations on this particular struggle, and it's important work. We know that when people don't have access to menstrual products, their ability to access their community is dramatically reduced, right? So they can't go to school, they can't go to work, they can't go to the library or take their kids to the library. They might miss out on, for example, funerals or anything else like that are really important moments for them to be connected to their community. And we're doing a couple of things on it. Of course, one of those things is we made a big request to Always in Tampax to support the United Way's Period Promise campaign despite COVID's challenges, because immediately when we saw an increase in food insecurity, we saw an increase in need for free menstrual products in our community. If people can't afford to buy food, they certainly can't afford to buy tampons and pads. And we also know, based on our research, that people will always buy food before they buy tampons and pads. So if food isn't even an option, then the menstrual products certainly aren't right now. So we made a request to Always in Tampax, and they gave us a pretty sizable donation. And we're doing two things with that. The first is through our food hubs. So those 59 local love food hubs that we've set up so far, we're expecting to set up another dozen or so in the next month or so. We are making sure that every single one of them has access to free menstrual pads to give out to their clientele all the time. There's never a concern about supply for them. The other thing is we reconnected with those 75 organizations that we've given menstrual products to over the past several years of running this campaign. And we said, what's your current capacity for giving menstrual products out to your community? And so we're right now at the point where we're reviewing their needs and their capacity, and we're sending out product to them. There'll actually be, on Mobilizing Local Love, that volunteer tool, there's going to be a bunch of volunteer opportunities that'll pop up to deliver product from our United Way office to various community organizations throughout the Lower Mainland and Fraser Valley, so that people can help us just get this product out as quickly as possible. So that's one of the ways that we're showing up. The other piece is, like, the advocacy hasn't stopped. May 28th was World Menstrual Hygiene Day. It's this international celebration for activists who care about access to menstrual products, to kind of try and increase the awareness and of this particular need. And we had this big celebration, digital celebration, where Suzanne and Nikki and I got invited to be a part of a global panel, a couple global panels and a couple national panels discussing the importance of this movement. And then we had this video that went around and to kind of celebrate and highlight the work that Period Promise has done, but also the need for so much more to be done. And we're still in regular conversations with government, both at the provincial and the municipal level, and to a degree at the federal level, saying, what are you currently doing? Now, of course, they're all very distracted by COVID. But through more than a year now of advocacy work on the policy side, we've seen incredible accomplishments with the Ministry of Education, the provincial Ministry of Education, with the provincial Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction. We're having really interesting conversations with a couple other ministries that I can't name but would love to. We've got some kind of motion passed from 6 different municipalities in the Lower Mainland. So that's Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, Port Moody, New West, Burnaby, and Vancouver Parks Board, all of them indicating in some way that they want to increase access to menstrual products in their facilities. And that's a huge accomplishment that I think if you had asked someone, Nikki, 4 years ago, when this was first brought to the United Way, if this would have been possible in less than 5 years, she would have been, there's no way. There are too many barriers. There's too much stigma. And I think that that's where the important work that unions really have contributed to this Period Promise campaign really shines. Unions, of course, are dedicated to equity. They're dedicated to addressing stigmas that are experienced in the community and making sure that working people have access to the supports and services that they need to have a lovely, important, valued, dignified life. And the moment that we presented this issue to them, unions got it, right? And not only did they get it, but they quickly understood, like, we have to take this to our membership. And so the Period Promise campaign is now this incredibly beautiful movement, but it started out and it still has as that core collective as the labor movement. So unions like Move Up and IVW 213 and I could name dozens, but that's the core of what's making this function. And so it's because of working people that this kind of change is happening, and because of unions particularly, that and the networks that they navigate in, the networks that they support, that we are actually seeing some pretty substantial change on a policy that is common sense to a lot of people, but just doesn't get discussed very much. So.
Absolutely, and it's just one of those things, like you mentioned, like, watching United Way and unions come together, being able to navigate such a complex campaign, which I know a lot of people don't feel comfortable talking about it, but you know what? It's a fact of life. We have to talk about it, Yeah. And so
it's more than a fact of life. It's the miracle of life, right? Like we're all here because someone decided that, well, someone didn't decide, but someone menstruates. Like we have a responsibility to support people who menstruate because that's just part of our community. So it's a miracle more than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? We're very excited to see where this campaign goes on, and what the next steps are. And I know you're going to have lots of support behind it from unions across BC and across the country. Neal, it's been such a pleasure to be able to chat with you. I know I mentioned off the top that we are just really scratching the surface on some of the things that that the United Way does. The fact is that if we went in depth into everything, I would have a beard just as long as yours. By the time we finished. But I'm sure we're going to see you soon, my friend. And please come back to join us at any time.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I'll see you soon.